Hello and welcome to all our listeners. Thank you for tuning in to the Capelle Podcast, where you can get insights from Capelle on navigating the recent trends in the business world. I'm your host, Ashish Ben, and today we have with us Mark Lee, one of our very own consultants, to share with us on the topic, engaging your millennials in your workforce. Mark, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ben. And it's great to be on the other side of the podcast, so to say.
Yeah, absolutely great to have you on the other side, Mark. So, Mark, you and I are both millennials, and very often we have heard this term being used to define us. So, for our listeners today, perhaps you can start with the working definition of what we really mean by the term millennial today.
Yeah, that term gets thrown around a lot, right, Ben? And it's used to label all kinds of people.
Yeah.
So the definition I hold to is one from Pew Research Center, which is just that anyone born between 1981 and 1996 is what we're going to use as millennial for the purposes of our time here today. So that really means anyone from the age of 24 to 39 in this present year of 2020.
Thanks for that, Mark. And so to dive into our topic today, why do you think that engaging millennials in our workforce is so key?
Well, Ben, us millennials, we form a large part of our workforce at the present moment, right?
Yeah.
So there's a significant demographic there that requires engagement. On a deeper level, I think, Ben, that you and I, our approach to work is rather unique and complex, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because we occupy, right, Ben, this space between the Gen Z generation, hey, I'm a TikTok, Instagram influencer, right?
Yeah.
You get so much of that on your social media, and they're building lifestyles all around sponsorship and influence. And, that's on our left, right, Ben? And then on the right, you see the Gen X, which are about, hey, put your nose to the grindstone, kid, right? And make sure that you work. So wouldn't you agree that we're kind of like sandwiched between these two drastic approaches?
Most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that, right? So we're quite critical, I think, when we see perhaps the extremes of either end. And so we don't really want to build, I think, careers that are built on just the likes of things such as social media influence or YouTube. At the same time, we're quite critical of saying, work, and that's all there is to career and life. So
Yeah.
I think we require a certain kind of engagement that finds us in that unique space and captures that kind of unique attention that we have.
Perhaps we can have a closer look into a millennial's outlook on work, especially to better understand how to capture their attention and even engage their concerns.
Yeah, I want to quickly qualify, Ben, to say that I can hardly speak for all millennials, right? I mean, you may disagree with everything I say. Hopefully you don't,
Yeah.
right? I'm sure that from my own observations and discussions with, friends such as yourself, I that's where I'm coming from. And, one of the dimensions that I think employers will want to consider is how, us millennials tend to have much more global outlook on life, right? Ben, you wake up and you look at the news, and I bet you don't just read news about Singapore, right? Yeah, you read about it all around the world, right? And that's the kind of world that we grew up in, where when we say world, we're already talking at a global level, right? We're talking life, we mean globally, that's what we look at. So we really look at people's actions and lives as having impact beyond our physical borders. Right. So the lens of millennials tends to be much more beyond the immediate cultural and local concerns to that of being a responsible global citizen.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask, Mark. Because I know, and I think all organizations do want to have an impact, perhaps even on that same global scale you mentioned millennials often aim for. But do you have any thoughts on how organizations can get started on that?
Well, Ben, I think it's just like how when you and I wake up in the morning and we set our mind on something, it's really about our mindset, isn't it? So, it's about how companies really want to be in the business of transforming their mindsets for the better. So I'm just going to list, 3 kind of quick fire tips that employers can consider to get their minds moving in the direction of developing a more powerful mindset.
Sounds great.
So one is, about curating best practices. So, when's the last time your company identified or refined best practices for your company? Ben, you and I, we do this actually every day on a very informal basis, right?
Yeah,
We review what we went through the day. What could we do better? What did we do really well?
exactly.
And we keep the good stuff and we try and get rid of the bad stuff, right? So, curate those best practices. The second thing I would say is to identify and experiment with talent. So I'll get into this a bit more in one of my later points, but essentially it's this. We want to be people who see opportunities, who see value where others don't, and then to capitalize on those opportunities.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, Ben. When you approach, say, a task at work, maybe after doing it 7 times, you ask yourself, could I do it differently the 8th time? Have you ever been in such a situation, Ben?
Oh, definitely. All the time, Mark.
No, that's why you're a valued member of our community, Ben. So, we want to be able to identify and experiment with new ways of doing things, and you need talent for that, right? And then the last one I'll just suggest is to get connected and to grow community. What I mean by that is we live in a vast yet interconnected world. So there are so many repositories of knowledge out there that are just waiting for you and your organization and your people to link up with and to contribute to. So let me ask you, Ben, besides the traditional news and media sources, how do you go about, say, growing your knowledge of the world or current events?
Well, Mark, I read the top stories on Google News. I see what's trending on YouTube or Facebook.
Yeah, right. What people post online, the different communities that people develop. Reddit is one that comes to mind. Discord communities. These are various repositories of knowledge and communities that are just waiting for us to link up with them. So, Ben, this is just a quick list, right? We could go on and on, but I believe you already see where this is going. We want to be able to refine and transform organizational mindsets because, especially for your millennial staff, they view impact on lives, cultures, and even the world, basically a sense of scale. Capturing that kind of mindset is what millennials really connect well with.
Thanks for those great pointers, Mark. I just want to pick up on one point that you made about talent. Because for us millennials who are starting out in our careers, and we are really only beginning to discover more and more about our talents and how to professionally use them.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. For talent, you realize that organizations that click well with the millennials are ones which are able to discern opportunities where no one else is able to. So what I mean by this is the organization regularly is on the lookout for opportunities to experiment, to push boundaries. And the way that they achieve unique value and service offerings in these arenas is by sourcing and developing unique talents of individuals and teams. Right? So Ben, the position you occupy was because somebody came along and said, hey, I think that this individual, Ben, has something really unique to offer to our organization.
Right.
So organizations click well with millennials like that because they want to bring in such talent and then test and refine it. Because, at this point in the time of our lives, Ben, we've probably gone through a couple years of tertiary education, 1 or 2 job experiences. And so there's a lot left in our tank, so to say, to be stretched and fueled and to be able to contribute and refine to really be productive and energetic for our organizations.
Mark, I was just wondering if you have any specific examples that you can share with us that might help us to understand this concept better.
Sure. Well, let's take yourself, Ben, as an example. We start somewhere, right? So, for example, you may know yourself a little bit. You wake up in the morning and look at yourself in the mirror, right, Ben?
Yes.
Adjust the hair on your handsome head.
Most definitely.
So, you know a little bit about yourself, right? Maybe you say you're a good debater or communicator because, say, you have debated in your university club, or maybe you did comms for your first job. Don't suppose that was you, Ben, at any point in time.
That sounds just like me, Mark.
Perfect. Okay, perfect example. So at that point in time that you have some talent in communication, right? But until you've been given a large enough opportunity, something that really stretches you, until somebody comes along and says, hey, there is an uncut gem of prowess in this guy, and I'm going to develop it. We haven't really been able to reach our full potential. So organizations are in this place where they look for millennials such as you and I, Ben, and I'm sure, for the other staff as well, but especially for millennials, where they want to be able to guide them. But it's a delicate task, right? Because what they're trying to do is create change, but they don't want to put too much pressure on the staff. Neither do they want to give them too much guidance. So it's a real balancing act. And organizations, I think, have to work with us and work very hard to model that willingness, that hunger to still chase that growth, that change, and just iterate on that process, because that's still something that really engages your millennials, even if it might be perhaps a little bit risky or a little bit scary or something.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that perhaps you could help our listeners process a little more, because I think there's an emotional element at play here about how change can be scary, and risk and experimentation without any guarantee of success can be really unnerving for a person. So how might we then really process these emotions so that we don't get paralyzed by fear or even anxiety?
Yeah, it's a great point, Ben. I think you and I, know what it's like to go through, all kinds of change, right? Especially at this stage in our life. And for organizations, it's likely the same thing. Whenever there's a big change that's coming about, I would say that as a first step, we want to acknowledge that these emotions are real.
Yeah.
And then to constructively confront them, right? Say, go to a professional coach, go to a trusted group of friends. I mean, how do you resolve your anxieties and your fears, Ben?
Well, Mark, I take a deep breath and I pray.
Okay, that's definitely helpful as well, right? Having that inner peace, right? And one thing I find helpful is that, along with that inner peace, to be able to then have that outer counsel as well, if you will, right? People who can help you evaluate your thoughts in a place where you're allowed to air your thoughts and feelings safely.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the first step, I say, to get that kind of support. And I myself am in the process of facilitating rapid transformation, and hopefully, sharing this story helps our listeners catch some insight. So I'm leading a process of rapid transformation in one of the young adult groups that I lead. And Ben, there's so many moving pieces, like leadership transition, personal development plans, deliverables that have to be constantly adjusted. And I'm the kind of person that likes to just sit down and deliberate about all these things in my mind. And Ben, what happens when we just, keep pushing thoughts around in our head?
Well, it just stays there.
Yeah, it just stays there, right? What actually changes in the process itself or in the work itself? Not much, right?
Exactly.
So I'm learning to balance that with a willingness to just get out there, put my hand to the plow, so to say, and get working. And then from the data I gather, right, from the real working, to then refine from there, to really engage people in real time, and not just conceptually plan things out, but to engage people in real time and then refine from there. So I hope that's something our listeners can pick up, which is that the fear and anxiety of getting about change is very real. But number one, have that trusted space where you can process those thoughts and feelings. And then number two, don't be afraid to, get experimenting, because your refinement, resolving those fears and anxieties really happens when you are actually working on the process in real time and not just in your head.
Definitely, Mark, these are some very useful thoughts for us. Now, even as we wrap up our conversation, perhaps you could share some closing thoughts on why it's so important that the organizations and their millennial workforce really need to integrate well together.
Sure, Ben. So before I respond with my closing thoughts, I just want to say that I think we covered a lot of ground today, many big ideas, and taking any one of those and having a think through, facilitating good conversations, facilitating opportunities with millennials in your organization, in any one of these areas will likely yield good results for you and your organization. As to my closing thought, I would say the heart of the matter is this. We really want to see employers and employees both engaging one another in such a way that resoundingly articulates who you are really matters to our organization, right? So Ben, I mean, you know what it's like to feel like you are involved with something, right?
Yeah.
You're connected to something. You're valued as a unique part of something, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that makes us feel like we're really valued and we're really able to contribute something of value. So we look at how interconnected the world is today, and there are people, that are just contributing and making impact at scale. So I think when it comes to engaging and training and developing the millennials in their workforce, what organizations do when they dedicate resources to that engagement of their millennials is they're really heeding the cry of the hearts of their workers, which is this: help me make a difference for our organization and potentially for the world around us.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. And thank you to all our listeners. We hope that you benefited from this podcast on engaging your millennials in your workforce. Join us again for our next episode in a few weeks' time on inspiring and empowering the next generation to lead change. Thank you, and we look forward to having you on the next Capelle Podcast. Goodbye.